This meeting is being live streamed via the council's website, hopefully, and will be available following the meeting. I would like to welcome those members of the public watching the live stream and attending in person, and also welcome the newest members to the committee. As members know, live streaming this meeting means we have some different microphones and cameras in the room, so I'll ask members to please speak clearly when invited to do so, so the microphone picks up what is being said, and we'll ask others to please refrain from speaking while someone else is addressing the committee, so there isn't any interference on the audio. Secondly, when speaking for the first time, all members and officers, if you could clearly state who you are for the sake of those watching the live stream. If a councillor needs to leave the meeting before the end, please let the clerk know. I shall now ask the clerk to confirm any apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Tim Cobbett, for whom Councillor Dave Ryder-Mills is attending as a substitute. And we've also received apologies from Councillor Natasha Irons and Councillor Martin Whelton is attending as a substitute. Otherwise, we have all members in attendance at Cllr.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Do any members have an interest to declare? I don't believe so. So we'll move on to the election of a chair and vice chair for this municipal year. Do I have a member willing to make a nomination for a chair?
I'll nominate them.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Yeah, so two colleagues from Whelton. Thank you. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We now need a vice chair. As before, do I have a nomination?
Nominate Councillor Andrew. Thank you.
And a seconder? Councillor Sweeney, thank you very much. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. This means that Councillor Andrew is elected vice chair for the remainder of the municipal year, and I will act as chair. Now we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Can we approve the minutes of the meeting held a little while ago on the 17th of December 2020? Agreed. Thank you. I'm not aware of any urgent business, so I will move straight into the main agenda items. I believe the first item is the phase A and B contract management report. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you. Hi. Yes, thank you, Chair. Andrea Keys, the interim strategic partnership manager. So this is the contract management report for Q1 period this year, so April 21 to 30th of June 2021. The report provides a summary for the following shared contracts. We've got contract 1, which is waste receipts and transport services. Contract 2, which is your HRRC services. Contract 3, which is your green and food waste composting services. And then finally, phase B, our residual waste treatment contract. The update of contract 1 is at 1.7 of the report. As I say, contract 1 is our waste and receipts and haulage contract. It's operated by Viridor Waste Management Limited. The contract is operating well. There have been no turnaround or availability issues, and there's been no issues to report with the delivery of this service. Section 2 of the report, we've got a summary for our household waste, household reuse recycling centre sites, which are managed by Veolia. You can see at 2.2 and 2.3 of the report, we provided the summary of the COVID-19 measures that have been in place since March 2020. We've kept in that brief summary in the report for you. In July 21, the services went back to pre-COVID operational configurations. Some special measures have continued, and these include the enhanced hygiene measures, which is washing down of handrails and frequent contact points. Social distancing remains between staff and customers. That means staff still can't directly help the customers with lifting their waste. And then the pre-booking systems, which will remain in place going forward in Kingston, Merton and Sutton at this stage. Veolia also have the site user satisfaction surveys at the HRRC sites. The surveys were suspended during set periods in the last 18 months. The surveys continue to be completed though, and results show that sites continue to achieve in excess of 80% of satisfaction. There was one exception to this, which was between February and April 21, which we reported at the last Joint Waste Committee. If you would like to see a summary of those surveys, they're available on the SLWP website, so for you to access for your individual sites. Moving on to 2.7 of the report, we've got the recycling performance, where we highlight for this Q1 period that we're reporting the sites achieved a combined recycling rate of 67%, which is a 1% drop on last year's performance. Appendix A shows you some more details of the recycling performance by individual sites. 2.10 of the report, we've provided some high-level analysis of the tonnage data. Now, as the report states, we would typically compare this year's data with last year's data, but given the sites were closed for 6 weeks for this Q1 period last year, the data just wasn't comparable. So what we've done is we've looked at the previous year, so 2019, and we've done some comparisons to see how the sites are operating against pre-COVID levels. When we did this comparison, it does look like as we move into Q2 with even fewer restrictions, we're seeing the waste horizon start to return to pre-COVID levels. So we're starting to see things return to normal at the recycling centres. And we expect to see that to become more aligned as we progress through the year. So interestingly, the analysis does also show that the green waste at the curbside continued to stay high. So there was an increase during COVID, and the results, the tonnage data we've looked at show that we haven't gone back to pre-COVID levels. So there is still a tendency for residents to want to recycle their green waste at curbside. So yeah, more green waste at the curbside and slightly less at the HRRCs. Moving on to section 3 of the report. Contract 3 is our green and food waste composting contract, managed again by Viridor Waste Management Limited. And you've got a summary of all the tonnes that we've collected again in Appendix A, and that's our part 3. This contract is also operating well. We've had no issues to report for that contract. Section 4 of the report covers our 2012 residual waste treatment contract, and that is with Viridor South London. During the period reported, we delivered in just over 53,000 tonnes of residual waste. This was a marginal drop of just 0.08% when the data is compared to the same period last year. So we're still not back at the 2019 levels, but when you do look at that chart on Appendix A, you can see we're starting to become more in line as you look at the monthly data. So we're hoping to see that fall back into line to where it was again pre-COVID levels. 4.3 of the report, we've got some information on our landfill diversion via ERF. Viridor have a target of 91.34% for this contract year. Now you can see in Q1 they've actually sent 9% to landfill, and the reason for that is largely due to the maintenance period this year when the plant was down for maintenance, so it wasn't processing the waste. So we'll see that as a percentage that figure will fall as we move through the year. Finally, section 4.4 of the report, we provide details of the emissions reporting at the ERF. The report highlights that following the planned shutdown in April, there was an exceedance of the sulfur dioxide, SO2, 30-minute average, and on the 2nd of May, there were a further 2 exceedances. We did discuss these at the last Joint Waste Committee briefing. Viridor have reported the cause of the exceedance is likely to have been the result of some waste that had higher than normal sulfur content, for example, plasterboard. The issues were identified, appropriate action was taken at the ERF, and in all cases, the facility remained within its daily limit in all 3 of those cases for its average SO2. The EA were informed as per procedure, and the emissions data is obviously published on our virtual visitor centre, so it's publicly accessible if you'd like to view the emissions data in more detail. So that concludes the elements that I wanted to highlight from the report. Let's take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from colleagues?
Councillor David Myers, cabinet member for finance. I always ask you about the HRRC. So, in terms of the booking system, is the intention now to just keep that in place, or is it likely that that will stop at some point again? And do we have an idea as to, since the capacity has increased, whether people are having to sort of wait to make appointments, or whether the increase in capacity means that people are generally able to make an appointment? And then just in terms of 2.10, the suggestion seems to be that we think that the tonnage will increasingly return to pre-pandemic levels. Is that even if the booking system remains in place? Because we think that a lack of capacity is stopping people going there, or does that assume the booking system that needs to be lifted to return to those levels?
Thank you. Always welcome the questions from HRC. In terms of the booking system, that is an individual borough decision. So it's for Kingston, they've decided to keep the booking system in place, and that's a policy decision. So it's very much at the moment, at this stage, it's something that is for boroughs to consider individually. We obviously would provide that service as a partnership, and we'll continue to provide that if you want to continue with the booking form system. We're currently looking at a new booking form system as well that will have extra functions on it that enables you to maybe cancel appointments, move appointments. So it's a bit, the functionality is a bit, it is more user friendly as well. So there's some improvements made there. Are we meeting demand? We are not getting the feedback that we were initially, that there was insufficient space and insufficient capacity. In July, when we opened up all the spaces, we increased capacity by 25%. So it was quite a significant step, but we will continue to monitor that. At the moment, we feel like we're meeting demand. We are, of course, moving into the quieter time of year. So we do need to recognise that actually this is quieter as we move into autumn and then the winter months. So the real test is the sort of April, March time of year when you see if you're meeting capacity, because they're the busiest times in terms of footfall. Well, in terms of the analysis that we do, that is just tracking the data and the increase in tonnes that we're seeing so far. So I've not really made any assumptions about booking forms staying or not as such. I'm just tracking each month, looking at how we're doing this month compared to that 2019 figure. So I'm not really extrapolating the data forward. It's very much a retrospective, how we're doing compared to previous years.
Do we do any analysis on the number of times people attend? I wonder if there's a tendency, because you can't just drop in the way that you used to store up their refuse and maybe go once rather than go 3 or 4 times as they might have done in the past. We got many days.
So I haven't analysed it in exactly that way. We do monitor the number of times that people visit when they book. That's quite a simple process, so we can see how many times they book. In terms of, are they visiting less now than they did before, we can look at our data actually and in more detail, and with that specifically in mind, I can have a look at that. The hope is that yes, people are planning their visits. You know, we're reducing the number of car journeys, and people are thinking about the visit a little bit more rather than just popping in ad hoc. So that is the hope, but we can have a look at some more of the data in that respect with our CCTV and ANPR.
Because it sort of goes to the capacity point, doesn't it? Because if we're assuming a set number of visits per hour, but if previously the average visit was say 10 minutes and now it's 15, 20 minutes, that's going to impact how quick the
Exactly. Yeah, and we can also look at number of people who visited and the amount of tonnage that we've collected. So that will give us a really good indication as to kilograms per person. Has the kilograms per person increased? So that's something that we can look at as well. Because yeah, you're right. If people are visiting on fewer occasions, then actually and storing up their waste and segregating it, they might also be going through a quicker pace as well. So, thank you.
Comment rather than a question. I live quite close to the Kingston HRS. And the only feedback I've had is that actually people quite like the booking system because they don't have to wait so long. And instead of having queues down various roads, you just go in. I actually went yesterday and drove straight in, dumped all my garden waste, and went out again in 10-15 minutes. And that was full farmland. So it's got its advantages, which I think people are seeing as well. But that if you are booking, and there seems to be no delay really, it's okay. Any weekends maybe to book quite early, but otherwise it's virtually, time for them the following day. And I think it's a great success. That's why we kept it.
Good. Yeah, no, I mean it's interesting. The feedback we've had has been generally positive. The majority of feedback is positive, and you're saying about getting in quickly. We have got capacity, and the forms are booking up, and the slots are booking up a lot slower. I don't have the facts and figures in on that to mind, but yeah, absolutely. Lots of people have commented, really pleased with it. They know exactly how long. They know they're not going to be queuing when they get to the site. So and they know exactly, and they do plan a little bit more. You plan ahead a little bit more because you're going and you're going to get in. So yeah, thank you. Good to hear you.
From Sutton, it's been the same feedback we've had. I think, and the reason why we were attracted by the booking system is that you either get a guarantee that you're going to get in, or you turn up and hope for the best. And sometimes you're there queuing for an hour. So giving people that guarantee, even if it means planning it a bit more, was something quite attractive to us. And I think the feedback that we've had is really positive. I was going to ask you, Andrea, on whether we have captured any sort of satisfaction surveys or any data on the booking system itself, and whether that's something that you ask on the HRC surveys.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this, and I think it's an action that we can take away to get to that question on the satisfaction surveys. Yeah, absolutely, because it'd be good to get that live feedback and that continual feedback to make
Yeah, and I think it'd be helpful to be able to see if the response is similar between sites, or whether there's differences between sites in terms of
yeah.
satisfaction.
No, that'd be interesting. Yeah, we'll add that question.
This was going to be a question for John's paper later, but I know the challenge for us in terms of the booking system is the number of people that go on the website, book a few slots, and then don't turn up, which in terms of the capacity issue is a bit of a problem. So we've piloted I think we call it the fair usage policy, which is a 12 times a year limit for people. And if my memory serves me right, I think 96% of people go less than 12 times. So we're trying to educate people that there's been a few emails from residents concerned that they go over 12 times, but actually the data says that 96% of them don't, and most of those that go over 12 times were commercial traders, and they shouldn't be going there anyways. So I think hopefully with the software improvements, we're going to try to, as soon as we implemented that fair use policy, we saw the level of no-shows drop. I don't have the data, but I've heard dramatically.
Yeah,
So I think that's combining those two policies might be the way forward for and at the moment the problem is that if you don't have the ability to cancel an appointment. So I think soon we'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
And we have that. I think it'll be two policies that in my view go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think yours was over 30% no show. There was a real issue with no shows, and then of course they're taking up a slot that somebody else could have taken advantage of. So yeah, absolutely, we're sourcing the new software which has extra functionality. One of those is to cancel, reschedule, and it gives you a sort of a running total of how many visits you've had, etc. So yeah, really, we're looking forward to that new software coming out.
That's a sweet.
Yeah, I admire your 12 visits per year fair usage. We've implemented 20, and then also given for some reason there was one concern that 20 wasn't enough. Some, but if you feel you need more and you have a legitimate reason. There are charities organise certain types of reasons why people are going to tip refuse collection centres, a lot. I'm interested, maybe it's a sort of an action that can be followed up afterwards. This software that is, we have this problem, it's put together as a pandemic issue. So it works well for booking, but cancellation is not an issue at the moment. And I'm keen that we address that. I'm not sure if we're looking at a joint solution, or if we're all working independently. But can you sort of provide details on that for the members if they're interested? I'd be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it would be, you know, a joint procurement. So it'll be software that you can all access. So it would be a booking form system that all boroughs, all 4 boroughs can access if they want to. It will include cancellation. So obviously the specification already says that it needs to have the cancellation function, because we had a lot of feedback that that's what the public wanted. So it will have that. And I can, more than happy to just do a summary of some of the specification that we're asking for providers to include. So we haven't completed the process yet, procurement process yet, but it's in progress.
It'll be interesting to compare the 20 and the 12 visits, the percentage and stuff, and see where that sweet spot is in terms of the amount of times people should be visiting. Councillor Cummings.
Thank you. Patsy Cummings, Deputy Cabinet Member for Sustainable Corridor. First time here. Glad I'm joining you, Andrew, as the only other female in the room. 4.5 and your exceedances sounds very innocuous on paper. Sounds like it happened 3 times. The sulfur dioxide. How bad is that? Is there any problem in any community in the area, and what actually happens, and what is being put in place for it not to happen again? How severe is it? It sounds like it's not very bad on paper, but was it?
So in all instances, they stayed within the daily average. So in terms of the emissions, you have the environmental permit, which sets what they call the safe daily and hourly limits for a range of different potential emissions, sulfur dioxide being one of them. I brought some stats with me. Actually, I'm going to look down at them because in terms of since the plant's been operational, you asked me in terms of, how often does this happen? It's very, very infrequent, and we're talking 99.99% since March 2019 when the ERF was first commissioned. 99.99% has been compliant in the cases of sulfur dioxide, and 100% compliant in cases of hydrogen chloride, oxides of nitrogen, ammonia, and particulates. I won't go through all of the facts and figures, but the number of exceedances are very low. Obviously, we want the plant to operate at 100% compliance with the Environment Agency. We have been working with Viridor extensively to look at the reasons why these exceedances happen. The variable nature of the waste is predominantly the reason why, and they have a lot of measures in terms of how to react to in order to control and bring down those emissions. In terms of impact on the local air quality, the Environment Agency have been very clear that they don't see any issues with the plant. And if they did see any issues or were concerned that was a risk to local residents, then they have the ability to take the environmental permit off the operator. So they really are incentivised, Viridor. They can't operate that plant without environmental permit, and the Environment Agency do visit, they do regulate, and they will revoke the permit if they feel that there is a risk there. So they are. As I say, we do want the plant to be 100% compliant. I don't want to downplay it. Any exceedance is something we don't want to see. But in terms of the impact, very, very low. Thank you. Okay.
And am I right that we have one of the strictest reporting mechanisms in terms of ERFs across the country? Yeah,
it's the most transparent. So it's so the Environment Agency set the levels, but what we have is the virtual visitor centre, and we also have the emissions all of the emissions data that the Environment Agency receive, we actually publish that. So it's publicly available. Every 2 weeks, we publish the emissions data. And yeah, so I'm happy to share with you the links and everything for that. But yeah, I don't know of another contract in the country where the contractor does that. So I think we are, yeah, well, yeah.
I know we discussed this at length in June, and then we met with the EA as well. And John and Andrew prepared really good briefings on that topic with a lot more, more details and stuff. So maybe we could share them with council.
Yeah.
I think
Great. Thank you.
that would be helpful. Any other questions before we move on? No. I know that the recommendations are just a note and comment, so we don't have to approve anything. So, Matt, I presume we don't have to vote on this or anything. Yeah, we can just move on.
If the committee agrees to note them,
Are you?
we can move on.
Do we agree to note? Yeah. Fantastic. So we'll move on to the budget report from Michael Mackley.
Yes, my paper is quite brief and not as exciting as Ken's section. This paper provides an update on the practice budget position for its strategic management activities up through June. The 2021 financial year and projected out term for 2021 financial year, 2022 financial year. The outturn position at month 3 is for an unspent £15,000, and the major variation of detail in paragraphs 2, 3, 2.4, and recommendations to note the content, which is
Very good. Short and sweet. Any questions from colleagues?
Can I just ask, and it might be more for Andrew, but just in terms of the restructure, it sounds like that's all now in process, likely to be in place from the start of the next calendar year.
That's the plan. That's the timetable for it. So the SLWP director will be coming to members shortly as well with proposals for the new structure. It's being drafted at this moment. So it's in draft. It will be going to the environment director soon, and then she sounds.
Great. I just had a question around. There was a mention of vacancies. I just wanted to get some reassurances that the vacancies haven't impacted the work of the partnership. I know there's been the work's been covered by consultants, but just wanted to get that reassurance on the record that it hasn't had a negative impact on our work.
Have our reassurances. Yeah, no, we have had support, some external support. As you can see from the budget, there has been, that's the reason there's been additional spend on external support. But no, absolutely not. We've continued to deliver the projects that we wanted to deliver in that time frame. So no, the assurances are there.
Others? Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Okay. So if colleagues are happy to note the report, we can move on to. And I don't see an indication that we're not noting. So let's move on to item 7, which is the comms paper from John.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone, councillors. My report is so exciting that it appears to have been printed twice. So, so bad. So yeah, apologies for that. So we'll just go through it once. So my name is John Haynes. I'm the Communications Advisor for the South London Waste Partnership, and I'm here this evening to talk through the paper which provides an update on communications, engagement, behaviour change activities relating to the Phase A and Phase B contracts, which are the contracts that Andrew has been talking about previously. And this report focuses on activity between June and August, because we had a committee briefing back in June, and we have an update from me then as well. So moving on to section 1, we start off with an update on Recycling Week, or Recycle Week rather. Believe it or not, it's that time of year again, 20th to the 26th of September will be Recycle Week. It's now in its 18th year, and it's always had a very clear focus, Recycle Week, of encouraging people to recycle more of the right things more often. we know now that there's also a lot of other stuff going on. We layer around that, in terms of waste minimisation and reuse and repair week, etc. The recycle week very much keeps its focus on that recycling element, what we're trying to encourage residents to do. And the theme this year will be on how recycling can help fight climate change, which I think is actually quite interesting and quite opportunistic for us, because it's also the direction that we want to head in terms of, we were talking earlier about the link between plastics going into the refuse bin and the impact on carbon emissions. And I think, there's an example there of where we don't need to change the call to action. We've got residents to put less plastic in their bin, but the motivation for doing so, there might be another angle there in terms of making that direct link between the impact they can have on climate change and carbon emissions and the way that they manage their waste at home. So I think it's quite an interesting angle. So I'm really pleased actually that Recycle Week are also going down this avenue, this line. The strap line is Step It Up This Recycle Week, and like I say, there's lots of assets being developed. They're all under strict embargo at the moment, but you'll see them very soon. And like I said, they're very much focused on comparing the impact that recycling has with other things that we could be doing, taking cars off streets, etc., etc. So I quite like it. I think it will be quite impactful. So it also leads in nicely to COP26, which I know is something we will be thinking about and how we can sort of make that make sense to residents at a local level. So I think there's lots of reasons to be looking forward to Recycle Week this year. The SLWP boroughs will have use of the wrap promotional materials, and they're being localised for London by London again, which is the same as we've had for the last few years. The focus once again this year will be on a very sort of high profile paid for social media advertising campaign. I think London was sort of forced into that last year, and because of COVID and the fact that no one was out and about really, so there was no point in doing the usual outdoor stuff. But I think a lot of their analytics have shown that that's delivered some really good value. So they're going to be focusing on social media again. And I'm pleased to say we've managed to secure £4,000 of funding from the partnership boroughs to help push that out amongst our region. And London will also be paying for the agency fees. So they've got a specialist social media agency on board to help target and deliver that. So all of that £4,000 funding that we've managed to secure will go on actual advertising budget. So that should be pretty high profile across the region. And we're also at a local level working with our colleagues at Veolia in the comms and engagement team at Veolia. They'll be running some road shows at each boroughs during Recycle Week just to complement that social media activity. We'll be putting stuff out there saying if you've got any questions for residents that prefer that face-to-face engagement, if you've got any questions about recycling, pop down to the high street on this day at this time, and you can speak to some experts to get some answers. So we'll be running that as well. Section 2 of your report, again linked in with London. This is something called the Food Wave Initiative. It's actually pan-European. It's got European sort of funding behind it, and it's an interesting project that I've heard about. It's focusing on food waste, and again the link between food waste and climate change. And it's looking at educating and inspiring young people, particularly disadvantaged young people, and trying to inspire them to become some activists and influencers in their own sort of peer groups and own networks. So quite an interesting campaign idea here. It's kind of started. There are lots of different phases to it, and it's started, but it runs through to the end of 2022. And the bit I think that I'm most interested in is the workshops that they're looking to run with, like I say, sort of focusing on some disadvantaged areas, particularly working with young people. London do seem keen to work with us on this, and I'm just sort of trying to explore some options. They're particularly interested in working with Croydon on something, so I'm in touch with your youth work. One of the youth work was to see what we can do jointly to do this, because I think it's got potentially some really good impacts in terms of youth engagement as well as some positive messaging around recycling. So I think that's something that we'll be exploring, and I will keep you updated on that. Moving on to section 4 of my report, focusing on the HRRCs. As Andrew mentioned, the customer satisfaction surveys continue to run, and the results are on the website, on the SLWP website. We did provide some support, as you said, Councillor Sutton, in the introduction of the fair use policy and also the charging for rubber waste at Kimpton Parkway, and those took effect since mid-July. That came into force. We had quite a comprehensive comms program in place, press releases, social media, booking form updates, and also site signage. And I think that's went pretty smoothly, as far as I'm aware. It seems to have gone quite well. And also down in Merton at Garth Road, we worked in partnership with Veolia and Merton Council to support one of your local primary schools, Hillcross Primary School. They've got a gardening club, and it was a really nice story. They got in touch. They needed some tools, some gardening tools. They didn't have any budget for it, and they wondered if people could bring their gardening tools down to Garth Road to donate to the gardening club. We put some stuff out there, and it was a really fantastic response. I actually dropped. I don't normally include photos, but we inundated with hose and spades and forks. So really nice. And actually, what it showed to me is a story like that really resonates with residents, and they like getting involved like that. And I can imagine myself, going into my shed and going, I've not used that for years. I'll give that to the local school. And you just need to give people the opportunity to do that, and they will do it. And it's got a lovely reuse sort of theme to it as well. So I think that was a really nice campaign. And it's something I'd like to explore with the HRCs a bit more, in terms of making them a place where people go to engage in reuse and recycling rather than just taking their rubbish there. So I think that's something I'd like to look at. So that was good. Moving on to section 5 of the reports. There's an update on the Bennington farmlands restoration. Now, Viridor recently produced, who managed the site and are in charge of that restoration programme. And for councillors that are new to the committee, this is the programme to restore the old landfill site that is now closed. It's being replaced with the energy recovery facility. The old landfill site at Bennington is being restored into a nature reserve, and eventually we'll have public access and cycle paths and all that sort of stuff. So lots of work going on there at the moment. It's a huge project. It gets a lot of scrutiny and attention because residents and local stakeholders are very keen to see that work is progressing at the rate that's required in order to hit the deadline at the end of 2023. I think is the commitment they have to finish the restoration project. And as part of that, they produce these regular sort of snapshot updates that they put out on social media, etc. I think this is the August one, and at the time of publishing the report, this wasn't ready, but I do have some copies, so if any members want to come and grab one, please do, because there are some photos, etc. But the August report focuses on work that's taking place on phase 3 wet grassland, which is down towards the southern end of the site, close to the cricket club. Excavation work on that section of the site has now been completed. The gullies and islets are being formed. Sounds like I know what I'm talking about. These are things that birds need, apparently. And that will allow this part of the site to naturally flood and will create a habitat for nesting birds. So it's an important part of the project. The next phase is to install anti-predation fencing around this part of the habitat. We've had issues in other parts of the site with foxes getting in and disturbing some of the nesting birds. So we're now very using this special fencing to try and to counter that problem. There's an update on work on the meadowland, which is also towards the southern end of the site. They've removed some fencing, which has enabled them to sort of mow that habitat better and will give them better access to that part of the site. And also probably the highlight of the update is the construction of the cycleway, which runs right through the middle of the site. And that's progressing and is on its way, running from north to south through the middle of the site. A bit of an update on the Bennington site. There has sadly been some vandalism in the bird hides. There's a number of bird hides located across the footpath that runs along the western border of the site. And they're really nice bird hides, and they're quite important. They've been about a year. And they've sadly been quite bad vandalised. Viridor are liaising with local police, etc., to try and do what we can to counter that. On a more positive note, a local artist called Christina Peake. I don't know if if any local members might know her. She's been successful with an application to the Bennington Community Fund, which is the fund that Viridor manage linked into the site, to deliver a community art project. And they're going to be she's going to be co-creating designs with local community to be installed in the bird hides. And the objective of that is to try and deter the vandalism. So that's hopefully a nice positive outcome to what's not a great situation. So yeah. And that's also a good opportunity for me to remind everyone about the community, Bennington Community Fund. I know I do it every meeting, but it's there, it's available to support local community projects. Grants of up to £5,000 for any community project in the South and West Berkshire region, and up to £30,000 for projects that are located within 2 kilometres of the Bennington site. And that does take us into Croydon, Merton, and Sutton. So there's some really good opportunities there. And it's going really well, the fund. We're getting lots of interest, lots of applications. I know Viridor will provide an update to you on what they've done this year, but it really is going well. And finally, section 7 of my report provides an update on the Bennington Erf and constant engagement around that. The focus, as you know, in recent months has been on measuring the carbon impact of our residual waste treatment activities. In June, the committee members were presented with Viridor's carbon management plan, which I'm sure you'll remember. And since then, we've had lots of briefings with different groups of members and stakeholders to sort of get everyone up to speed. It is quite a complicated subject area, so we're keen to make sure everyone's got the knowledge that they need to understand, what we're seeing, what we're reporting on. So been a lot of work around that, and I'm really happy to, I think it's really important this. So if any members or community groups feel that they benefit from a more detailed briefing on carbon, I'm more than happy to help facilitate that. The Carbon Steering Group, which is a group that's been set up by Viridor, but it's also got partnership representatives on it, and we will soon be having a JWC member representative. I think Councillor Haviland will be joining the group from the next meeting, so that's fantastic. We've also got representatives from the borough, not just waste representatives, but also some of your carbon sort of representative, your carbon experts on there. So that steering group meets quarterly. We met in July, and we've agreed that there are lots of things we want to do generally, but also around comms of engagement. But I think the priorities that we agreed in that group were to develop a section on the virtual visitor centre, the Bennington Erf virtual visitor centre, which talks about carbon and the role it plays and what we're doing to try and reduce carbon emissions from our residual waste treatment, but also the role that residents can play in terms of their behaviours at home. So that's a priority, and we also really want to look at delivering probably next financial year a campaign, like I say, that doesn't have a different call to action. It's a familiar call to action. Put less plastic in your bins, whether that's by using less plastic or by recycling more of the plastic you have. But it's just about trying to get another motivational angle in there, and make that direct link. The fact that your actions can make a direct link with carbon emissions, I think, is potentially quite powerful. It won't resonate with everyone, but it might resonate with some people that need another reason to make that extra effort. And I'm also thinking potentially, we know that most people, I think, recycle the really easy stuff, the plastic bottles and the containers, but it's that hard stuff that's not always collected at the curbside as well that I think we need to think about. The soft films, the soft plastics, the bags, etc. And I think we're increasingly seeing outlets for that stuff. Still not at the curbside yet. There are real challenges to collecting it at the curbside, but I know my local supermarket have a collection point. I think they're delighted when I turn up with my huge pile of soft plastic. So I know, they wouldn't thank us if we suddenly started getting everyone to use that. But I think over the next year or so, we will see more and more of that. Co-op will just come on board with it. I know Marks and Spencer's do it a lot. So I think the people that are willing to make just that little bit of extra effort, and for me, it's that first step. It's about having that extra bin at home. It's about saying, get that extra bin. It could be small, it could be a bag hung on the back of the door, whatever, and start sorting that solid film out from the rest of your plastics. And that's the first step. Then we can try and encourage them to to take it to solid outlets. So a bit of work to do there, but just to say all of that's being sort of shaped and formed by the carbon steel that we're. There is at a corporate level, I just wanted to highlight here. I know you've just heard, you've had an update from Viridor today about their sort of national commitments around carbon and carbon reduction. So Viridor have made announced some very ambitious plans to become carbon net zero by 2040 and carbon net negative by 2045. And they're going to achieve that by rolling out carbon capture technology across their fleet of energy recovery facilities. So I think that's really exciting. I think it's potentially a game changer for the industry. They're starting at Runcorn, which is their largest plant up in the north. It also happens to be located very close to an existing government project to pilot some of these carbon capture technologies. So they're starting there, and their plan is to have that installed by 2026. So we're talking relatively near future stuff. But we need to make sure that we're at the front of the queue, saying that we want this at Bennington as quickly as possible, because I think it's got some real benefits to it. A quick update, Heritage Open Days, 10th to the 19th of September, so starting in the next couple of days, we've got an actual visitor centre at Bennington Erf as well as the virtual one online, and it's very nice. It's a lovely visitor centre. Sadly, almost as soon as it opened, it had to close because of COVID, so it's been really sad that it's sitting there and very few people have been to it. I think we're getting closer to the point where we can open it again. Viridor understandably being quite cautious around that, because the last thing we want to do is suddenly have lots of our team at Viridor having to isolate because of COVID, and then we can't process items. Otherwise, this is a really critical frontline essential service. So Viridor being incredibly strict across their whole fleet around, controlling access to those sites. But hopefully, we're not far off being able to open that visitor centre up again. But so normally for Heritage Open Day, we would be encouraging people to come to the site, have a look around, see the facility. We can't do that this year, but we are going to be providing the boroughs with some social media content to try and encourage people to visit the virtual visitor centre and have a self-guided tour from the comfort of their sofas. And so a bit of a shame, but we won't let it pass without doing anything. And finally, on emissions, as Andrew's mentioned, I liaise closely with Viridor to make sure those emissions are uploaded to the site frequently, twice a month is the commitment. There was a slight delay to getting the second half of July data uploaded, and apologies for that. That was caused by annual leave from some key people at the Bennington site, but that data is now uploaded. And Viridor apologise for that as well. It's now on the site. We've mentioned about emissions. I'm more than happy, Councillor, if you want to sort of go through that in a bit more detail. We've had lots of briefings with Environment Agency and Viridor about emissions. I know it's a topic that's going to be at the top of your priority list for obvious reasons. So very happy to brief you in more detail outside the meeting. That would be helpful. But I would just add, since the May sulfur dioxide exceedance, there haven't been any since then. So we've gone 4 months now without a single exceedance, and that's obviously what we would like to see continue. And that wraps up my report.
Thank you very much, John. It's very comprehensive. I'll open up for the questions.
Well, the minister obviously make a few comments. We certainly welcome very much the RAP Recycle Week, how it can help fight climate change as the Climate Change League member in Merton. Something that's certainly very, very well. And we will be doing lots of social media around that, because we know it's a very important topic, and also as well engages with people. We'd also as well like to mention the across we hope see other schools do take advantage of these opportunities become available, because it has been very successful, and it has engaged younger people as well about the art of the possible and reusing gardening tools as well. And we obviously know that a lot of schools now have set up gardens within their school. And my final point is obviously in relation to 7.4 becoming a carbon net zero by 2040 and net negative by 2045. Obviously, we would like to see this as soon as possible. I think you mentioned this before, but additional government funding to actually enable this to be speeded up, because it is very many of our residents and we've all got very ambitious targets to meet as local authorities. Thank you.
Very much.
I was just going to pick up on the carbon capture point. Yeah, I mean, it's a point we are stressing constantly to Viridor. I think just I don't want to dampen enthusiasm, because I think it's very exciting. Bennington's a very challenging site for carbon capture because of the footprint of the site is very small. And currently, some of these carbon capture technologies, they take up a lot of space. We're talking some football pitch size facilities, so they're quite big pieces of infrastructure in their own right. So there's clearly a challenge there, but and like you say, the other challenge around how do we pay for this stuff? It's not cheap at the moment, but obviously the hope is, I think it's really promising that Viridor are at the forefront of this in the industry. I'm sure we will benefit from that at some point. But there are a few pieces that need to fall into place before we can see it Bennington. But yeah, we'll keep pressing the point, absolutely.
Is that something that potentially the steering group could look at? Just in a bit more detail, what would be the challenges of the carbon capture technology at the site and so on and so forth?
Absolutely, the steering group there's an opportunities register that the steering group refer to on a regular basis, and that's got the whole range of potentials, and some of them are really easy wins, like LED lighting, driver training on the site for reducing diesel use in mobile plant, for example, things like that. We're just saying, we'll do that, no problem. Other stuff's a little bit more challenging, solar panels on the roof of the facility, for example, that requires a bit of investment, but it's not that challenging to do that. I think I'm sure that's something that we can deliver. There's other things like carbon capture that are still quite early stages and need a bit of support. I think the challenge here is to get a balance between being ambitious but being realistic and managing expectations. So I think we want to show ambition, and we want to make sure that Viridor are aware that of all their contracts across the country, we're the ones that want to do this and want to help them and support them and remove as many barriers as we can. So that when they're saying, "Oh, where can we try this out?" Well, let's go down to South London. So I think that's the best position we can put ourselves in.
Thank you. That's Andrew.
Thanks a lot, John. I was interested in the conversation around Recycling Week, and I think it's a fair point around the same message, but with maybe a different angle and a different motivation because of the sort of increased interest around carbon emissions. Difficulty with recycling, though, is sometimes the action's quite sort of basic, and I was wondering if there's any other educational bits we can tie into there. I think one that springs to mind for me is like around contamination, because I know that it's a constant frustration for us in Sutton when residents and councillors want to see more public recycling bins, and we're basically told, look, you can do, but the ones that exist are often contaminated anyway. And whenever I've sort of tested this on my friends, did you know, etc., people are quite surprised. So I think education around like what not to do, as well as what to do, could be quite an interesting take on that. As well as the other message on recycling, I just feel like it maybe is a message that has been done so much that there's sort of room to expand to slightly different kinds of messaging as well. I don't know if that's something you could look into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there has been a shift in the last few years away from, there was a point where it's kind of, recycle everything, don't worry, you can't get it wrong sort of attitude. And now there's that kind of, if in doubt, leave it out message. And I think that's in response to the industry, because the industry, the sector has become much tighter on contamination for various reasons. So where loads that would have been accepted 4 or 5 years ago are now being rejected because they've got too much contamination. So I think maybe the comms hasn't caught up or hasn't reflected that enough. But I suppose there's a concern that you might come across as a bit negative. It's all about what you shouldn't do, what you can't do. But I completely take your point, and that's especially where bins are shared, like in street locations. And we are doing a lot of work around that. I know Merton have done some trials in Cobbett, in Wimbledon, and I think they're showing some fairly promising results in there. I know in Sutton that we've done some down Sutton High Street and in Central Road in Worcester Park, where We're using the big belly bins with lots of really clear messaging around what you can and can't put in, and some pavement stencils to say recycle here, don't recycle it.
Yeah, to be clear, I think it's very much the public bins that I'd be concerned. I don't think messaging about contamination in the private homes would be very good. I think it puts people off, and it's quite obviously much smaller scale. Whereas in public, you can have a couple of people moving up inside.
Yeah, that is the challenge. That is the challenge. So hopefully, from these trials that we've been running, we'll get some really good results and some feedback from that, and we can put a business case forward to the rest of the partnership, say that we need to roll this out wider, because yes, there's some investment, but the business case is that you're going to get a good quality recycling rather than refuse, so you make a saving on disposal costs. So that's the case that we need to build.
Councillor Ali, and then
Thank you, Chair. First of all, John, this is by far the best part of the agenda. I really enjoy the sort of the mix of all of it is a good news stories. I really welcome the opportunity around communicating around the recycling week, but linking it to climate change. For Croydon, I think for everybody else, it's a big challenge. It's behaviour change and communicating it in a way effectively to make households make the right choices and the right decisions. The question I was going to ask is, in Croydon currently, we're planning to refresh our comms around waste. And I was just going to ask you, along with a couple of other questions, how close do you work with the comms teams in individual boroughs across the partnership? I don't think there is some sort of working group. But just thinking if we're benefiting from each other's experience, it looks like you're doing a great amount of work there. So that's one.
Yeah.
The second one was around the visit to the ERF. I know some of us around the table are new to this, whether there would be any benefit for some of us to go in sort of without breaking the whole operation that we don't want to do. But if there's an opportunity for some of us to visit this in a safe way, that would be really, really appreciated. And lastly, I think the thing you mentioned about the community fund, and it would be useful to know who is applying for it and what are they doing with it. Primarily, I'm really keen to promote it wider than just this meeting. I'm sure people are listening to this as well, but I think there are other avenues where we can promote it. And I remember talking to someone about earlier this year. We had so the London Road Carnival, and I don't think many people knew that this was an opportunity. And in fact, I don't think anybody then applied for it. So I think it'd be useful for us to communicate wider through different channels, and we will be happy to promote it as well. So I think initially to see what's the uptake, who's using it, and then how can we promote it even further. Thank you, Chair.
So yeah, so to answer those in order, I work very closely with boroughs, the comms team and the waste team. So I had a virtual meeting today with Cllr, Whelton, Danielle, Emery, and Dickinson. So yeah, I on a almost daily basis. We do on a more formal level. We have a monthly comms meeting with the Veolia comms team and comms representatives from all the boroughs. So Cllr is your sort of key comms representative, and that's also attended by a representative from the service area as well. We've got the next one of those on Monday. So I think it can be challenging at times because you've got, I feel sorry for the Veolia comms team sometimes. They've effectively got 5 clients. They've got the partnership and then they've got the 4 boroughs. I think trying to put this together sometimes can be quite challenging for them. But I think, we work well together in partnership, and I think, we would be very keen to sort of support your local team as well in their comms and advising and trying to make sure it fits in with all the other stuff that we're doing. In terms of JWC visit to the ERF, absolutely. It was something we raised with Viridor when we met with them last. Formally in the contract meeting, but I think at the time we still had, this was before there was the relaxation in terms of contacts. So at the time, if you'd been in contact with somebody around COVID, you still had to, the pandemic was still going on, and Viridor was still very nervous about any visits. I suspect now that the guidance has changed, they may have relaxed their view a bit. So we'll make sure that a joint waste committee visit to the site is top of the list, and that you're some of the first people back in there. Because I think it's really important, you're out in the streets, knocking on doors, talking to residents about this site. I think it's really critical that you've been there and you've seen it with your own eyes. So yeah, absolutely. In terms of the community benefit fund, I will get an update that I can circulate to you. I'll find out, some examples. I know Viridor put a press release out a few months ago, which talked about some of the projects they've funded. So really wide range of things. I think there was a community food project in Croydon that they bought a huge commercial freezer for that was like, £6 grand or something. So things like that they're the sorts of projects that they're supporting. But I'll email an update to all councillors and provide details of where groups need to go and make applications, etc.
And I just have two questions on the recycling stuff. And obviously this links to some of the food-based stuff we talked about last time. I just wondered if you thought we would get anything useful from it. I'm sure you'll get lots of quantitative data about how people have read it, that sort of stuff. But in terms of honing the message about, yes, it's good to recycle, but it's even better to not consume as much in the first place. Do you think we're likely to get any useful data from this that might help us with that? And the second point was just on recycling at the curbside and the difficulty that or some people not always knowing what they can and cannot recycle. I know in the past we've done some specific comments. I think at Christmas we did something on wrapping paper. But I wondered whether it was worth periodically doing, because we all got fairly transient on populations, and quite often residents move in and not necessarily know what they can and can't recycle in Merton. And I'm sure it's the same beyond. So it might also be worth just reminding people what Veolia will accept. They don't make that decision.
So in terms of the data on whether the campaigns are actually having impacts on behaviour change, that's the Commons holy grail, isn't it? And it can be very challenging. I think we're quite lucky as a partnership because we've been doing for the last decade. We've been doing these every 3 years. We do these resident surveys, and it means that we can track over quite a long period of time attitudes and opinions. We can see if our campaigns and our efforts are actually having an impact on behaviour. Because you're right, these social media campaigns are great because they give you some really impressive numbers. 4 million people saw my tweet. Or did any of them actually do it? I think they started that plastic. So I will ask Relund and RAP about how they plan to evaluate whether this has been a success or not. And I'm hoping that it would go beyond just the number of likes they've got. But I suspect it will be quite challenging to know for sure whether it's had a direct impact on people's behaviour. But like I say, luckily at a local level, I think we are in a better place for that because we've got some good baseline data and we've got access to tonnage data. A lot of the work that I do with Veolia, a lot of it's not represented in here because it's part of our phase C work. A lot of the comms work that I do with the Veolia team is they're out and about on the streets doing monitoring, participation monitoring, how many food waste bins are out on this round, and then we do some intervention, and then we go back and check and see. So I'm really, really keen on making sure that as much as it's possible that we can prove that our stuff is actually having an impact, rather than just saying we sent out loads of stuff. But it can be a challenge. And in terms of the knowledge of what you can and can't recycle, just to remind everyone, every November we send out a newsletter to every household across the region. And that contains information about changes to Christmas collections, but it also contains sort of a double spread service reminder, which keeps it at a fairly simple level because I think most people get put off by huge amounts of information. So we try and keep it fairly simple and just say that these are the things you should be putting in, and these are the 5 most common things that people put in that shouldn't be put in. So we will be doing that again. So that is your kind of regular reminder of that going out. I'm looking at what we can do in terms of some of the other feature stories as part of that newsletter. I might do something linked into COP26 and about consumerism and the impact we have on a global level. Because I'm quite interested in that angle, in particular the relationship with China and their consumption-based emissions versus their export emissions. Or it's all that. But there may also be an opportunity to do something around plastics and carbon and that sort of stuff as well. So there's a good opportunity with that November newsletter to get that reminder out there to residents. Thank you.
I had three. One's already been asked about the community fund, and the second one easy. If you give me details, you need to whatever your liaison with the bureau, let me say it. I'm going back to the Recycle Week. Obviously, this is South London Waste Partnership, but presumably this is happening across London. The Recycle Week, is that right, or across the country even?
It's a national campaign. So the RAP provide the campaign materials at the national level. London, which used to be the London Waste and Recycling Board, but they reinvented themselves to be London. They're a sort of a Mayor of London funded organisation. They are in charge of localising the campaign for London boroughs, and they've also got this pot of funding to get £4,000 from. So not all London boroughs have been successful in getting funding. Those boroughs, all boroughs can use the materials free of charge through their organic comms channels, through their free comms channels. But what we've been able to do is to get funding to pay for a paid-for social media campaign as well.
My question is, if it's a national campaign, and whether or not there's sufficient funds, and it might be prohibitive because of the cost. Why on earth not do ads, TV ads? Because there's Sober October, there is, Macmillan Cake Week, there is laughing ad for McDonald's, and I see queues upon queues lining up to go to McDonald's now because everybody's seen the ads. They are really good. They're in our homes over lockdown. So many things were communicated on TV. Is there funds to do that? Because that whole concept of people not knowing what is recyclable, doing it, and it's those little buzzwords. I mean, it needs to be done cleverly. And I don't know whether or not there is any differences to what each borough is doing specifically in terms of their recycling. But some of those key messages, they can tie into COP26, it can tie into young people who are just so on it with regard to climate change. And so TV ads, I mean, has that been thought about?
Yeah, it has, and actually we have used TV ads in the past, targeted adverts to support the rollout of the new service in Sutton a few years ago. People assume that they're way out of the reach in terms of budget, but actually there's new technology on board that means that they're not. So you've got things like Sky Ad Smart. So Sky, it means that you can target your ad at particular households in particular areas, and you know when they've watched the advert. It's a bit scary. It's quite interesting. And actually, the advert itself is quite cost effective. The challenge is creating the content. Now, it doesn't have to be, super duper, we don't all have to create a Guinness advert. It can be simpler than that, but it still has to be of a certain quality. It has to be professional. You can't create something, in PowerPoint and put it on the TV, but it just doesn't sit right. So there's a little bit of a barrier around that. The reason we did it with the sat-nav was that we happened to find some content that was already created and we could just tweak it a bit. So most of the costs were done there. It's certainly something I could talk to London and to RAP about, because if they could provide content, if they could provide the ads, and we just pay for the actual screening of it, like I say, there is technology there that would make that potentially viable. So that's something I can certainly raise with them, see if we could stick some help with it, because I agree with you, it's a really, really powerful medium. And the biggest challenge with the old school TV advertising was that you didn't know if someone had seen it, because they could have, it played, but were they out making a cup of tea or they got to the toilet? Whereas these new ads, that the ad's being delivered, and you only pay once it's been delivered. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Thank you. I'll pick it up.
Any further questions or comments from colleagues? Looks like it. So if everyone's happy to note the content of the report, we have no further business this evening, so we can wrap up the meeting. Thank you, everyone.